You don't typically think of ministry, academia, writing, or art as incredibly lucrative fields,
No.
right?
Who knew?
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up, and we're going to give you an update on Muskie, the skunk outside of our house. And then later on, we sit down with Reverend Dr. Angela Yarber, who is an incredible scholar, writer, and you're not going to want to miss this conversation as it is the last week of Women's History Month. So it's a good pod, so stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I am well. How about you?
I'm so tired.
Oh, no.
So tired. I know we're almost 2 weeks into the time change,
Right.
right? But
I think it's 3 weeks, but go ahead.
no, is it really? All right. Well, but, to be fair, we were traveling during the time change into different time zones.
Indeed, we
So we're doubly or triply messed up. And I just cannot. This time change is so difficult for me to adjust to.
Okay, I have to admit something. I am not a fan of daylight savings time.
Ooh, you're going to get hate mail over
I am
that
going
one.
to get hate deal, but I don't, it doesn't bother me. I hate waking up when it's dark outside.
Okay, so here's my problem. I just hate waking up.
Fair point.
Full stop. I have a hard time going to sleep at night. I'm a night owl. I will just, I don't know. I have a hard time settling my brain.
Right,
But
sure.
anyways, but here, I'm just so difficult after this time change. And so over the weekend, I've been sleeping in later than I should,
Yep.
right? And one morning, well, I don't know, middle of the night, I woke up and I just sat up in bed really quickly because I thought someone had turned a light on in our living room. And I was panicked, like somebody was in the house.
Oh, that's terrifying. Yeah.
It's like, who turned a light on?
Right?
Turns out it was God. Like the sun had come up.
That'd go up. Well, that pesky sun always ruins your mornings. I know.
I know. And then so I'm having a really difficult time waking up in the morning. Thank God I don't have to clock into an office at 8 a.m. I'd be just in a whole load of trouble right now. So
Well, maybe we need to talk to your boss about this.
maybe we do.
Well, happy 250 episode, Missy.
Oh, this is the 250th
This is the
episode.
250th episode. Absolutely.
Yes, we talked about that earlier in the week. And do you want to know what the traditional 250th episode gift is?
What is that?
It is one of two things:
Okay.
a renegotiated contract
All right.
or a retirement plan.
I think we can handle both
Which is
of
it going to
those.
be? Which is it going to be?
Yeah, I got some duties assigned by the boss.
Oh, no. My agent will be in touch with demands.
Yes, it's 250. I cannot believe it. We started this podcast back in 2020 when the pandemic hit, trying to get information out there to the public, and then it's just evolved over
It just
the time.
won't ever
It's-
end.
Every week we're coming.
The never-ending episode.
But it's been fun. It's been a fun, and you joined the cast, or you joined the
cast.
cast, the
Sure.
podcast back in
About
2020.
halfway through, yes.
Yeah, and it's been fun, right?
Hey, we're still married, we think.
We think.
think
every Monday morning I get a resignation letter and divorce decree, and I have to either sign one of them or just put them in a desk. So they're in the desk.
True. That's not untrue. Yeah. So it's our happy 250th
Yeah.
episode. I can't believe
believe
Good
it
Faith
either.
Weekly has been around that long.
Hard to believe.
But here we go. And here's to 250 more
thought you were
and
gonna say
maybe a new guest host or new co-host.
Yeah, maybe a host as well. But
Yeah.
we've discussed have met some incredible people along this tenure of Good Faith Weekly. I mean, just really, we feel fortunate to be able to talk to some of the world's greatest minds and thinkers and shakers and doers. And we get to do this every week. It's our
Did you
job.
say shakers and doers?
Shakers and
I'm
doers.
good with that. Okay. Yes. So every week we come to the pod and I get to feel even more inadequate
That's right.
in my life. So,
But you keep us entertained with all of your stories and
Okay.
your flight exploitations.
exploitations.
Or what would you call those?
Let's go with adventures.
Yeah, we'll talk. Well, I think I was accurate on the first time.
It's probably better.
But I mean, your stories are great. And, more recently, we moved into this 100-year-old house. Listeners had to endure all of that.
I'm pretty sure we probably lost a good chunk during our
quite
renovation
certain.
process.
Yeah. But, and we do have an update, though,
Well, yes.
on one of the house guests.
Yes.
that
So
we-
last week we filled our listeners in on kind of the saga around our guest, or not guest. I mean, I guess they're our squatters, which were the skunks.
Or we're their guest.
I think that's more accurate. Yes,
Yeah.
we had skunks that had taken up residence under our house, and I
Muskie
feel like
the skunk.
I think I may have said this last week. It's like a church when they call a pastor, and you've got the old folks there sitting, the curmudgeons sitting there telling the pastor, "We were here before you got here, and we're going to be here when you
That's
leave."
right.
And that is the way the skunks are looking at us right now with their
Exactly.
crossed arms, like, "We were here before you. We're going to be here after you."
Absolutely.
But no, so we have taken steps to relocate several of them to another place, and
And we really do mean relocate.
yes, not
Out
like
into the woods.
not like your childhood dog
Yeah.
goes to the farm. Not at all. Like they've
Right.
truly been relocated. And so now we have sealed up the access points under the house, but we still have our Elmer Fudd camera
Yep.
outside that's monitoring the perimeter of the house. And we've learned that we do still have a skunk pet.
We do.
And we also have a raccoon pet.
We do.
And we also have a possum.
We
Pet?
do.
And among other things, birds.
I'm going to say during the day, Elmer is hunting birds now
Yes,
because
yes.
birds are showing up on
and,
this.
and the cat.
Yeah,
and cat.
and cat,
who,
yeah.
who our regular listeners are well familiar with. But
Yeah.
yes, we also have these other little friends who come along. But I wanted to share, I've been Googling because, trying to figure out, do we just let this skunk be? Because to be honest, if we didn't have the camera, we would have no idea
No
any
idea.
of this was going on, right?
Right.
Thank God we didn't have this stuff when I was a teenager. Oh my gosh.
You'd have never slept. Maybe that's why you're so dang tired. You're up watching skunks
No,
all
I'm talking
night.
about it as a teenager. You know what? I'd have been caught
Oh
like
my
doing all sorts of
gosh.
things.
Oh, that's so right. Yeah.
Right? Anyways, so I've been doing some research, and our listeners will be glad to know if they're in a similar predicament that according to one wildlife website, skunks are the gardener's and farmer's best friend.
Really?
Yes, it says their diet is almost entirely beneficial to man and his interest. All skunks are omnivorous, but most of their diet consists of animal matter such as grasshoppers, crickets, mice, voles, shrews, insect larvae, turtle eggs, worms, beetles, grubs, caterpillars, slugs, weevils, spiders, millipedes, baby rats, and mice.
Wow.
So I've decided, as if you follow us on social media, you saw a video of our affectionately named Muskie.
Mm-hmm.
I've decided to just leave him be,
Okay.
because if he's going to monitor the yard in that way,
Yeah.
then I'm cool with it.
Yeah. 3 things on that list that I will actually pay him to do.
Uh-huh.
That is get rid of rats and mice
Uh-huh.
and summer crickets.
I
If I
know.
never have to get up in the middle of the night to hunt down a cricket, it will be worth him living underneath our house.
Absolutely. I knew you would appreciate that list. Yes. So we have affectionately named him, as I mentioned, Muskie, which is, we've decided to kind of name him somewhat after Elon Musk, because
There's a certain stench
we're
there.
hoping, right, we're hoping that if we let him come in and just give him like a non-official title,
Mhm.
that he'll just kind of do the job we want him to do without destroying everything.
Yeah. So he's running Doge underneath our house, skunk Doge
He's
underneath.
not underneath our house. I don't know where he's living now.
Yeah.
He's not living underneath
No,
our
he's
house,
not.
but he is patrolling
He is
each
patrolling,
night.
indeed.
So I'm going to be good with that.
Okay.
We're just going
That's
to
a
leave
win.
that. So just like I mentioned, cameras around the house, technology is an amazing thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we need to be careful how we're using it.
You must be talking about this week's breaking news out of Washington, D.C., when it was discovered by Jeffrey Goldberg, who is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, that he was on the end of a certain text message by our Secretary of Defense and our National Security Advisor, uh, Pete Hegseth, and then the National Security Advisor is Michael Walls. They, Missy, accidentally sent out the bombing plans that the military had devised on Yemen. And the editor in chief, Goldberg, didn't realize that he thought it was fake until he saw the bombs dropping in Yemen and realized, oh my gosh, they sent this to me inadvertently before the bombs dropped. And it's caused quite the stir across the country. There was hearings about it this week in Washington, D.C. And as you can imagine, the Democrats are up in arms and the Republicans, not that big a deal.
Okay, but I don't even know if they're really hearing about it other than within the hearings. I don't know that the general population
Right.
is hearing about it because, let's be honest, I mean, some sources aren't covering this very well.
Yeah.
However, it is terrifying.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely terrifying.
Do you think when either Hegseth or Walt sent that they knew what they had done and kind of like, have you ever sent a text message inadvertently?
No, I've been thinking about this because you and I have strong opinions about group texting, right?
Very strong opinions.
Have you ever accidentally sent a text message to someone or included someone in a group?
I don't think I have.
Okay, I remembered one time
Uh-huh.
as we were getting ready for this episode today and I was thinking about this. There was one time I was thinking about planning an event,
Mhm.
hosting an event, and I drafted this really long text message to kind of explain the event. And you and I were still talking about whether we wanted to do this or not. And I accidentally hit send. And so then it was like, okay, which that wasn't like a huge deal.
Right.
But that was the only time I could think that I ever accidentally sent. I'm sure there have been those times.
Mm-hmm. Now, I have been on the receiving end of unwarranted text messages.
Ooh, dude, I love these stories.
So I was a pastor at a local church here in Oklahoma, and I had a parishioner one time get a little upset with me about an encounter we
Just
had.
one time, right?
Just one time.
Just one
Yeah,
time.
just one time. Yeah. And there's a lot going on. There's a lot more to the story that I can't tell. But she was irritated with me, and she had the right to be. She had the right to be. I didn't say it was justified. But she sent a text message intended to send a text message to one of our deacons to tattletale on me that I had been rude to her and that all kinds of other things associated with it. And she sent it to me instead of the deacon. And I just gently said, I think you meant this for somebody else.
Okay, I'd forgotten about that story until you said it.
Yeah.
Yes, that was cringeworthy, but also I'm so here for it
Yeah.
because it was.
And she responded, she says, well, I guess you know how I feel now. I said, okay, I guess I do.
Way to go for just owning that.
That's right.
No, there are all sorts of funny stories about group text, but there's just some things that, I mean, are just so basic when you're sending a group text. And it's terrifying again because this is our national security. These are people that you trust to know what they're doing. And
Right.
there's just not very much semblance of knowing what you're doing going on right now.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't even know what else to say about it other than it's rattling. I mean, we can
It
make
is
jokes about it, and
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah, and that's what's really concerning, especially for those in the party who's in power right now, just kind of blowing this off a little bit. And there's some who are concerned about it, and rightly so. But I mean, to be so blasé about our national secrets and our national plans when it comes to safety and security of our armed forces. I mean, if that were to fall into the wrong hands, or if a journalist decided to go ahead and print that prior to putting our armed forces in harm's way, I mean, that could be devastating. I mean, it could cost people's lives. And so, there's been a lot of calls for the Secretary of Defense or National Security Advisor to step down. That has not happened as this recording. But it's going to be an interesting week as this plays out.
absolutely. Yeah, you're right. But also, what about her emails, Mitch? Come on.
Yeah, I remember something about that a few years ago. Everybody was up in arms about Hillary Clinton's emails. Had hearings about it. Nothing was found. No.
I mean, yes. So it's all very frustrating, but it's it really is scary.
It
Like
is
you
scary.
said, it
Yeah.
does these decisions and these mess ups do actually endanger people's lives.
Yeah, and people who are putting their lives on the line for us
And
and our freedom around the world.
I know we're all human and sometimes we're going to make mistakes,
Mhm.
but this was a
It was a big
biggie.
one. It was
It's
a
a
big one.
biggie and a really easily avoidable
Yeah.
thing.
So as tempting as it is to disengage during this time, we've got to stay engaged. Got to keep aware of what's going on because there's a lot of dangerous things that are taking place. And so let's keep up the diligence and keep engaged in the process. Speaking of engaged, Missy, this is the last week of
Are you proposing?
proposing. This is the last week
It's
of
about time.
Women's History Month.
Oh, yes.
And we thought it would be a good idea to have a scholar and minister on the pod this week to talk about her work empowering women, particularly women in the LGBTQ plus community, with their writing skills and their communication skills. And so we got to sit down with Reverend Dr. Angela Yarber this week to talk about her work.
Yes, she is fantastic and doing just amazing work in this space.
So stay tuned. We'll be right back with Dr. Yarber.
For decades, the Festival of Homiletics has nurtured, challenged, and inspired thousands of preachers in their God-given calling. And this May, you can be part of the revival from the comfort of your own home. Live stream the sermons and lectures from our compelling speakers throughout the week, or watch the recordings at your leisure, and participate in dynamic community through our interactive platform. Please join us as we restore what has been depleted and nourish one another at the festival. Please visit www.festivalofhomiletics.com to reserve your spot today.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. Reverend Dr. Angela Yarber is a 10-time award-winning author, international best-selling artist, professor, retreat leader, and founder of Tehom Center Publishing. With a PhD in art and religion, nearly 2 decades as a professor of women's gender and sexuality studies, and 20 years as an ordained queer clergywoman, she writes, paints, teaches, coaches, speaks, and leads retreats all over the world. Her work has been featured in Forbes, NPR, HuffPo, Miss Magazine, The Advocate, the television show Tiny House Nation, and more. Her most recent book is the Entrepreneurial Handbook, How Writing a Book Can Create an Abundant Life for Marginalized Writers. Angela, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here. And thanks for that very kind, generous introduction.
You're welcome.
So, Angela, let's begin by talking about your overarching work. On your website, angelayarber.org, you write, "My calling to teach about revolutionary women is what most enlivens me. Whether it's coaching marginalized authors with my publishing company, painting forgotten women from history, speaking about queer spirituality, or creating community by leading retreats with subversive sister saints among the gender spectrum, I rejoice in elevating feminist, queer, and BIPOC women and non-binary kindred who are changing the world." So tell us a little more about your calling and your work.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking me that. Well, it's interesting because, as you both know, and the good folks at Good Folk Media know, your calling can manifest in so many different ways over time. I always like to think of mine as very organic, that the mission of elevating marginalized voices has been consistent throughout. But as a multi-hyphenate person who's interested in a lot of things, that has manifested in a lot of different ways. And so whether that is at the very beginning, my first career, I was actually a professional dancer. Believe it or not.
Wait.
Wait. We got to camp out there for just a second.
That was not on the list.
It was not in
It
the
was not
bio.
on the list. No, and that's several of my first few books were about the role of dance in religion.
Oh my goodness.
And that was my academic study was the role of dance and the body in world religions. And that's still very important to me, but I was never very good. And so I retired pretty early. I retired at 30 from dancing, but have been an ordained clergy person throughout, an academic, a writer. So really like creativity, elevating marginalized voices, wherever those things intersect, you're going to find me there scrambling around, either doing it professionally or as a hobby or as an enthusiast. That's where I'm going to be.
Wow, I'm still stuck on the dance
I was going to
thing.
say, I got so many follow-ups
I
after
know,
that.
I know. Okay, we'll get back to the meat of the conversation we were intending to have today. But just out of curiosity, what type of dance did you do?
So I started out in ballet, classical ballet, and very young, in my very early 20s, transitioned to modern because I didn't want to have hip replacement surgery by
Right.
40.
Right.
And because of turnouts, that often happens for professional ballet dancers. So transitioned to modern. And then because I was studying the role of religion and spirituality and how that intersects with dance, a lot of what I did was as a contract soloist doing liturgical dance, sacred dance. I would collaborate and contract with churches and denominations to help incorporate dance, or at the very least, movement
Right.
into worship and spirituality, because there are some who, frozen chosen, who get a little bit afraid of any kind of
Right.
spontaneous body movement happening.
So we both grew up in Baptist circles, which of course, are kind of known
We
for
grew up in Southern Baptist circles.
Southern Baptists, which are known for which the funny thing was though, my parents loved to dance and went dancing all the time. So it never was really a wrong thing for me, but in our denomination, it was kind of wrong, which was very confusing as a child growing up, trying to reconcile all of that. But no, dance was very much part of my upbringing in life. So I love to hear that you have studied specifically the intersectionality of that with spirituality.
I did. And even though Baptists have that stereotype, they're always dancing. I mean, we've seen the movies Footloose.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And that story is, we're going down a serious rabbit hole.
I'm so on board with this whole.
I'll simply say that story is, like, we see that throughout the history of the Christian tradition. Like, there's a famous council, the Council of Lyon, where they banned dancing, and you wouldn't be banning something that wasn't happening a lot, right?
Right.
So they banned dancing at this council in like the 400s, and then they ended the council with a lavish ball filled with
dancing. Wow.
So, I mean, it's hilarious, the history of this in almost every tradition, but especially in the Christian tradition. Like, people are like, the body's awful, and also it's fabulous. And so, yes, maybe we'll have to do another pod on that sometime.
Oh my gosh.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, I've got to ask this. I'm so sorry, but I can't help not chase this rabbit. So one of the things that's been very intriguing to me in the 30 years I've been doing this work, when I travel overseas, especially in places like Africa, Central America, and places like that, dancing seems to be very much a part of the worship experience.
Absolutely.
And even in more charismatic movements here in the United States, I don't know if we'd call it dancing, but there's a lot of movement and gyrations taking place within some of those.
I think they call that, isn't there a sect that calls it jumping for joy, or there's a group?
Yeah, I mean, But it's interesting to me how that has been accepted in other cultures, but has still not been fully adapted to quite an extent here in the United States. Is there in your studies, especially in worship, dance is prominent in some cultures versus the others, and why hasn't it caught on here in the States?
Well, this is a pretty negative way to start, but it's very true. And that is that white Christian missionaries ruin everything.
Hey, I'm on board with that conversation.
Full stop right there.
Full stop, right?
White Christian missionaries ruin everything.
And it's interesting because that is embedded in our culture and our tradition, whether it's in scripture and theology. It's been there all along, but white Christian missionaries stamped it out.
Yeah.
And that can be in things that we wouldn't even think of, from having pews that are difficult to move to the clothing that people choose to wear that prohibits their movement. So it's very much embedded in almost every culture. And it was embedded in a lot of white Eastern European cultures pre-Christianity, and even at the dawn of Christianity and over time. But post-Enlightenment, we really started valuing the head so much that we kind of severed it from the rest of the body. And so anything else that elevated the body, literally like lifting the hands, became scary. And that's, good gravy. I was not planning on this, but I'm excited.
No, I love it because I'm Native American. And of course, growing up in that culture, dance was a part of our identity as a community, as an individual. And then I think about the story of my great-grandmother who went to a boarding school, forced assimilation. And it was just everything you just said. It's this tampering out of culture and identity to replace it with this very white, stoic may not be the best word, but this
Restrictive.
rigid, restrictive
Yes.
religion or culture that replaced it. So it was really interesting to me when I found that out.
Well, the more you restrict someone's movement physically, you can restrict their movement mentally. You can restrict.
That's a good point.
It's restrict. And at the end of the day, it boils down to control, which so many things I think do. So
Absolutely.
Okay, so all right, we'll get away from dance, even though I reserve the right as
To revisit.
co-host to revisit any time during this conversation. So, Angela, let's talk a little bit. You've just released this book, and I have to really concentrate on pronunciation, the Authorpreneur Handbook for Authors, and you've launched a new publishing house, Tehom Center. So, tell us a little bit about why you decided to do this project as a writer yourself.
Absolutely. So it's interesting, another circuitous way of getting somewhere. As someone who was a dancer and ordained minister and a professor for a long time, you don't typically think, oh, eventually she's going to get around to running a publishing company, right? But as someone writing in the realm of religion, especially through a social justice lens, there aren't a ton of publishing agencies to work with. And those that do exist might not have the very best marketing strategies or ways of fairly compensating their authors. That's not always the case, but generally. And then also as an academic, like, the joke in academia is, oh, did you get your annual royalties check? Are you going to go buy like a pair of socks?
Right.
Because, they're like $13 or something like that. And, maybe 17 people read your book and then it just sits on a dusty library shelf. And so that was my experience with publishing my first 7 books with 4 different publishing houses, all wonderful people. No one did anything wrong. I'm not knocking them. But I am recognizing that when I chose to leave the church and leave being a seminary professor over a decade ago, because those institutions had become toxic for me, that I needed some other way to pay my bills. And so I had about a decade period of fits and starts of working as a professional artist, as a writer, but none of that brought about financial abundance. You don't typically think of ministry, academia, writing, or art as incredibly lucrative fields, right?
No.
who knew?
And so there was that element. And then around that same time that I was realizing that a lot of publishing companies just didn't know what to do with feminist, queer, anti-racist writers, especially with marketing us without forsaking any of those identities. Around that same time, I had 2 friends, interestingly, both queer women of color and priests, who worked with a hybrid publishing company that charged them $40,000.
Jeez.
$40,000 to help them write a book, publish the book, and then, I don't want to say the lie, but what they said they were going to do is help them leverage that book to build a $1 million business. You probably know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, the $1 million didn't show up.
Right. So no, now they are both $40,000 in debt, never earned enough to even cover that initial investment because it was a predatory publishing company.
Right.
And what made it particularly egregious is that it marketed to marginalized communities to say, here's your ticket to abundance and wealth. And to me, that was enraging. And so all of that was happening around the same time. I learned a little bit more about Black queer poet Nikki Giovanni, who was like, no one's going to publish me. I'll just start my own publishing company. And I was like, well, okay, she's awesome. Maybe I could do something like that. And so I decided to follow in the footsteps of my own ancestor, Gloria Anzaldúa, is a Mexican-American woman, who says, the world I create in my writing compensates for what the real world does not give me. And the real world was not giving me a publishing industry with equitable terms that knew how to market and work with marginalized folks. So I thought, I'll create that. So I created Tehom Center Publishing, which is a press publishing feminist and queer authors with a commitment to elevate BIPOC writers. And I learned very quickly that it was more than just publishing, that it was about equipping and empowering marginalized authors to live a true life of abundance, to be able to be that mouthful, authorpreneurs. So author plus entrepreneur equals authorpreneur. And so I did that, and we worked for about a year and a half as a publishing company. It was going well. And then I was coming up on my 20-year ordination anniversary. And I wanted to do something to mark that, but I didn't know what, because I hadn't served a church in over a decade.
Right.
And so I thought, well, I should offer the coaching programs that we offer at Tehom Center Publishing for book writing, book marketing, and entrepreneurship. I should slash that price in half, even though it's already equitable, and offer it just to ministers, because that was already 90% of the authors I was working with.
Right.
So I started a program called Ministry from the Margins Books. And the goal for my 20th ordination anniversary over a year ago was, I was like, well, let me see if I can get 20 people to sign up. We'll do this together. And lo and behold, we get 22 people and then have a wait list to where we start offering it once a quarter. And so
Wow.
now here we are 9 months in, we've had over 50 people in the program, over 20 books come out, over half of those have been bestsellers. And all that long-winded response led me to write the
There
Authorpreneur
it is.
Handbook for folks who might not have access to the coaching program.
Yeah.
So it's all of the techniques and the methods that we use, but for $24 or free at your local library if you can't join a program.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I was very intrigued when I was reading about the center and your publishing house, and then the authors that you're recruiting and then coaching along the way. I think it's just a great holistic approach to authorship as well as publishing people's passions and works. So, okay, so this sent me down a road of looking at your past writings, and you've got two books that really was intriguing to me. One was The Microaggressions in Ministry and The Gendered Pulpit. Now, both of those seem like you're trying to call out, which we're all on board with, call out and stamp out this toxic misogyny that exists within the church. So can you talk a little bit about how have we gotten any better, or is it just still the same? And are there things that we can do as churchgoers, as people of faith, to help really call attention to this misogyny that still exists and to be better at equality and diversity and all of that?
Oh, I love that. And I think that question is so poignant right now, given our current political landscape. I mean, I'm not the first to draw that comparison between people rolling back DEI efforts and talking about how we are made in the imago Dei, right?
I love that.
And so we see it not just from the church, but from wider culture, trying to stamp out these marginalized voices. I don't know if it has gotten better. So I think I wrote The Gendered Pulpit over a decade ago. And then Cody Sanders and I joined together to co-author Microaggressions in Ministry probably 8 or so years ago. And I think it's gotten better in the sense that the choir, not really the people beyond the choir, are at least familiar with the language to describe what they're experiencing. And that a lot of people who are experiencing the microaggressions have access to tools for grappling with them. But then when it's coming to so many people who are perpetrating the microaggressions, I think that's where it gets a little tougher.
Yeah.
And something that I think we as progressive spiritual folks can do is to educate ourselves about these topics. I'm not just saying that because I want people to buy our book, of course, but to educate ourselves about these issues, because if we have experienced a microaggression, so if I, as a queer white passing woman, experience microaggressions, then that should open up my eyes to see the ways in which I perpetrate microaggressions inadvertently, usually, against people of color, for example. And so seeing the ways in which we have experienced oppression, sometimes people think that is the only lens through which they experience the world is through oppression, rather than also seeing that you can carry privilege and oppression simultaneously in different forms and ways. And so I think that is one way. And I think that deep listening, and I think that y'all do a great job of that here at Good Faith Media, of deep listening to other people. And so that when someone from an oppressed group tells you that they are experiencing life or hurt or discrimination in some way, to believe them. I think belief and education are the first steps, and then we can take more steps to making direct action so that we can create systemic change.
Excellent.
All right. So, Angela, you are our final guest of Women's History Month. So we're excited
Ooh.
to have you in particular on. So I want to ask you, you mentioned on your website that you love to highlight and learn about revolutionary women. So I want you to see if you can list a few for us that have influenced your life and work that especially we maybe not have heard of.
Oh, I would love to do that. How long is this podcast?
Right?
You have the floor.
I'll lift up. I mean, I can't really pick a top two, but my two go-tos, right? So I've already referenced Gloria Anzaldúa with her quotes. So Gloria Anzaldúa was a queer Chicana feminist who wrote about the borderlands between Mexico and Texas, and does a lot of bridging work. Is what she's kind of famous for, is bridging these binaries between what is academic, what is lay, what is spiritual, and what is secular, what is English and Spanish, gay and straight, and does it in very gorgeous poetic writing, I think. And that call that she always has for our writing to compensate for what the real world has not given us is something that I heed and try to abide by on a regular basis. She's also the first person, to my knowledge, who is ever credited with coining the term spiritual activist. So talking about the ways in which her activism was guided by her spirituality. And that's something that we know almost every faith tradition has had throughout history. So Gloria Anzaldúa is one of my all-time favorites, but the person who's always my go-to is Polly Murray.
Oh,
yeah, y'all love Polly Murray,
Yes.
right?
I just learned
my
about
goodness.
her from Dahlia Lithwick's book. I don't know, what was it?
Last year.
No, it was like 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while ago, but no, she's okay. Sorry, I'll let you take the floor back. Tell our
So
listeners.
I adore Polly Murray. So my quick introduction to Polly Murray for listeners who haven't heard of her before is Polly Murray was a civil rights attorney who coined the phrase Jane Crow to acknowledge the sexism that accompanies racism in Jim Crow laws in the South. And she experienced doors slamming in her face at every turn. So wanted to go to law school, specifically to work on equity for Black women. And she was denied entrance into North Carolina because of her race, and then denied entrance to Harvard because of her gender after they offered her a huge scholarship because they thought the name Polly was a nickname for Paul. So she ends up going out to UC Berkeley, writes what Thurgood Marshall describes as the Bible of the civil rights movement. And then why haven't we all known her name, right? So she organizes sit-ins long before Rosa Parks. She founds the National Organization for Women. And then in her 60s, she feels called to ministry. So she goes to seminary, becomes the first African-American Episcopal priest ordained, officiates at her first communion at the church where her grandmother, who was then enslaved, was baptized.
Wow.
And throughout it all, she had committed and intimate relationships with other women, describes herself as a man trapped in a woman's body, takes hormone treatment therapy because likely if Polly Murray had had access to the language that we use today, would have identified as transgender. So here is this kick-ass revolutionary who is creating pathways for Black women and for queer women and for trans folks and for ministers and for civil rights. And like, it just doesn't stop. And she says, this is what she says about writing. She says, one person plus one typewriter constitutes a movement.
Wow.
And so I just think of her so often, anytime that I get bogged down in my writing. Of course, I'm not on a vintage typewriter, like sitting in a mossy gulch with a Scotch typing, but that might be lovely.
But that's how we'll envision it.
That's right.
Right? I'm on my contemporary typewriter of my laptop.
And
but-
for our younger listeners, a typewriter is a machine that you used to hit keys and it automatically put the words on the paper. Go ahead.
In the outro, we'll explain what whiteout is.
Right. That is indeed how I learned to type in Miss
Same.
Nick's 7th grade typing class.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I have to pause because that's a traumatic memory.
We're all going to have to take a moment on that one.
Yes. But I think of Polly Murray in those moments when writing becomes overwhelming, when I feel like it doesn't matter, you're just writing into the void, and how our words have the power to create movements.
Yeah.
And so imagine when myriad writers are coming together, and that's part of what we're doing at Tehom Center Publishing, is to create pathways where we all gather together with our modern day typewriters and movement build for a more just and equitable world. The world that Polly Murray so poetically wrote about when she said, "Hope is a song in a weary throat. Give me a song of hope in a world where I can sing it." That's the world that we're trying to create with our writing.
Great.
That's amazing. So as you're talking about, incredible women, let's talk for a minute about the importance of just women supporting other women right now.
Absolutely. It's been interesting to me because that was something that I always felt called to and pulled to in ministry, right? So studying feminist theology, womanist theology, things like that. But what has been surprising to me over the past couple of years, stepping more fully into entrepreneurship, is finding that sense of community with other women entrepreneurs and other business women. And if someone had said that to me even 3 to 5 years ago, I would have majorly rolled my eyes because I would have thought, oh, I'm not a businesswoman. But joining some women's networking groups that value collaboration over competition, and working with them, even in publishing some of their work. We just published a book called The Girl Boss Effect, How Feminist Networking Can Revolutionize the World, or something. I can't remember the exact subtitle, but it's been really important and impactful for me to be working with other women in a variety of sectors, because what I experienced as toxicity in religion is what many of these women experienced as toxicity in the corporate world or in academia, or insert almost any field where women are in the minority or who are just now achieving parity. And we need one another to support each other through that.
Yeah, I love that. Well, before we let you go, I've got one last question before I hand it over to Missy, and that is, we are dealing with a lot in the country right now. There has been this transition in presidential administrations, and the current administration seems to have put DEI square in its target.
Yes.
And they're rolling back rights for all varieties of people in this country. So Angela, as a theologian, as someone who writes about these issues, what is your reaction over the last 30, 60 days of what the Trump administration has done in targeting DEI specifically, but really trying to elevate, in my opinion at least, another white supremacy movement in this country? So I'm going to let you take it from here.
Oh my goodness. I mean, how much time do we have? I'm not at all surprised. I think most of us living at the margins have seen this coming for a long time. I think that so many of us are afraid. And I think a word specifically to our white and white passing cis kindred to say, whenever we can pass the mic, whenever we can elevate, that is our job right now. Because I think that people of color and trans folks in particular are so many people are under attack. You can't even list them all, but those in particular are incredibly important. And I think amid all of that, that so much of this is that, who knows what's going on in our administration's mind? And
there's a lot of echoes that go in that one mind in particular.
Right. But I think that so much of it is that so many different groups of people are being under attack to distract us from abiding in solidarity with one another, and to pointing fingers, and to make us so confused and scared and overwhelmed that we lose capacity for resistance, revolution, and joy. And so something that I personally have been trying to do, and that I've really been encouraging all of my authors to do at Tehom Center Publishing, is, yes, of course, write your legislators and protest and do those things. And every moment you have to celebrate or joy or frolic through a mossy flower field or whatever it might be, like, grasp those with both hands fully, because nothing makes people trying to destroy DEI more angry than seeing those of us who are diversity, equity, and inclusion happy and frolicking and tossing glitter in the air in a flower field. And so those acts, to not see them as cursory or extra, but to see them as part of the resistance movement, whether that is napping or joining your besties for a drag brunch or whatever it might be. And we can't give up on joy and rest right now, because that's what they want.
Yeah. So what I hear her
Well-
saying is she's bringing this full circle, right?
She just mentioned two of my absolute favorite things. That's napping and drag brunches. So
Oh, I love it. And dancing,
And
right?
dancing.
So
That's
we
exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, dancing.
Absolutely. So like, whether it's those living room dance parties where you turn on your music and you just, twerk it out or whatever you need to do. to do
Angela,
those
there's
things.
not a lot of twerking going on in this household.
remember those hips you were talking about? They're
In
getting a little
my
old.
family, there is a lot of twerking going
Okay.
but part of that is that it's really hard to be sad when you're dancing with joy.
Yeah.
And that's even part of what we see and part of what you asked. When the white Christian missionaries show up, it's like, oh no, these people are happy. We cannot have that. So in those moments where we can find
Yeah.
joy to do it, because that's evidenced in the history of survival in the United States. When we think of spirituals, when we think of the ring shout, that's all the body speaking on behalf of people who are being oppressed.
Well, Dr. Angela Yarber, thank you so much for joining us this week on Good Faith Weekly. Check out her website at angelayarber.org, as well as Tehom Center Publishing, and check out her new book, The Authorpreneur Handbook. It is very well written and spells out a lot of technique and passion if you are passionate about writing. So it's really, really well done. So thank you so much for being with us this week. But Angela, before we let you go, I'm going to turn it over to Missy. She's got one final question to ask you.
So, Angela, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
Well, I think you have probably already seen that I am a little bit on the loquacious side, so I have two more to tells.
Okay,
Excellent.
excellent.
So the first is for any marginalized ministers listening here. So whether you are a woman, BIPOC, queer, person living with disabilities, if you are interested in writing, our next spring cohort for Ministry from the Margins does not close for registration until April 22nd. So please join us. We would love to have you. So that is one. And then the other is an encouragement for all of us in these moments that are overwhelming and scary, to hold our heads really high and spread our arms really wide, because the world needs more marginalized people occupying more space. So in a world that tries to make us small or to disappear, to spread your arms really wide, there might even be leaping and dancing involved, but to do that with full-bodied gusto.
I love it. Great advice. Angela, thank you so much for joining us this week. It has been a pure delight, and you are welcome back anytime.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Mitch. So, something that has become incredibly clear to me following our conversation with Dr. Yarber and also just this Women's History Month that we've been celebrating is that we need more than a month. I'm just saying.
I think that's fair.
Because as you and I were talking about, how to wrap up this month of women's history that we've been kind of recognizing and talking about and figuring out what to put in this little 10-minute outro. And it became painfully clear it's not possible.
It's not possible. No way.
We need more than a month for sure. Because
Thinking
they're
2 to
just,
3 months, extra week. What do you want?
I mean, eternity. How's that? Women just need to have it all.
I'm
No.
reminded, when you say that, I'm reminded of that Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote when she was asked, when will enough women on the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
suffice? And
When
she
will
said,
there be enough?
yeah, when 9 of them are all women.
Yeah, when all of them, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So all year long.
All year long. So
Okay.
we're just gonna get into it. Yeah, so we started back talking about biblical days because it's, one thing that you just cannot deny is that women, whether known or unknown, have absolutely shaped the course of history. And all too often, many of them do go forgotten or glossed over. And that began for me in my first educational setting, which was the church. Because let's be honest, we started out in church way before we went to school.
Yeah.
And, women were side characters in the story. They were always meant to set up men for whatever they were called to do. But when you really unpack and look back at even the biblical narrative, like women were there shaping absolutely the future of people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Growing up in evangelical churches all my life, I mean, the emphasis was certainly more male dominated in the characters of the Bible. But as I continued to read the Bible and continued to learn about these stories, I was just mesmerized and blown away by the influence that women had throughout biblical history. And you think about women like Hagar, for example, who I still think is probably, outside of Jesus for me, the most interesting character in the entire Bible because of how she entered the story. Abraham and Sarah go down to Egypt. The Pharaoh gives Abraham a bunch of slaves. Hagar happens to be one of them. And then the infertility issues. And then Hagar becomes pregnant by Abram. And then she has the son Ishmael. And then all hell falls apart there with Sarah getting jealous and all of that when she has Isaac. But Hagar is the epitome of a strong woman who life has dealt her a bad hand, but she has taken the cards in her hand and did the very best she could, taking care of herself, taking care of her son, and making certain their lineage and line survive forever, and it still does today. She is an amazing woman and an incredible character. So I think of Hagar, I think of Miriam in the story of Moses' sister, when he's floated down the river trying to flee the Pharaoh's edict to kill all the children, all the boys. And Miriam is right there by his side and then, intervenes and says, hey, I know a nursemaid for this little boy, and give him to me and I'll make certain he's nursed. And so, I mean, Miriam, for example, Deborah, a military leader in the Old Testament, when all the kings failed, it was Deborah who stepped up and led the armies of Israel to battle. I mean, I could go on, Missy, of the incredible women throughout the Bible who have made such an impact on the biblical stories and have not received the credit due them because of the male-dominated world that we live in.
And that's really continued obviously throughout history. It just reminds me of a quote from one of our dear friends, Mark Gray.
Can you do it with Mark's accent?
I don't think I can do him justice.
Alabama.
But when he was talking, and I just have this quote in my, I keep quotes in my notes, and it just reminded me of this quote from him. And I don't even remember the context, but I just think about how women have continually they're forced to play 3D chess because the world is obviously playing against them. And he said one time, she's deep sea fishing, he's dip netting in the backwaters. And it just made me think of that. Like so many women throughout history are just forced to stay 3-4 steps ahead to survive within a system and in a context that they've been, placed into. But it reminded me recently that you and I have been for a long time, intentionally, surrounding ourselves with stories of women and powerful women or, women behind the scenes who are, unsung heroes. But one of which I wanted to mention was Feb Ensminger Byrne. Do you know who that is?
I do not.
The mother of Harry T. Byrne, who was the representative from Tennessee who cast the vote, who got as women's suffrage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And so we went to see Suffs on Broadway back in the fall, which plug, if you have not listened to Suf's music, pull it up on Spotify, listen to the music from that musical. It's
You will
phenomenal.
not be disappointed, and you'll learn so much.
You will learn so much, but she's the mom who wrote to her son, encouraging him to vote, in favor of giving women the right to vote. And he, states that she is one of the reasons. I mean, he lists several, but he said, a son is best, to do what his mom tells him to do. And I was like, oh,
Wow.
I don't know that our sons have
I was
ever
going to
said
say, that seemed a little too targeted.
it did. But anyways, it just like she was clearly influenced the history of our country. So another example I thought of, we've learned about women heroes throughout history is through the 6888 movie that recently came out.
Yeah.
About the African American Women's Army Corps unit that went over to Europe during World War II to sort out the mail that had been backlogged. And it was kind of one of those things where they got in there, it was freezing cold. They didn't have, of course, proper protection from the elements, but yet they got in and sorted through a 6-month backlog of mail in 3 months.
Yeah, think about that for a moment. I mean, the morale for the Allied forces was at its lowest because they were over there fighting a war. They're fighting, fascism and Nazi Germany at the time, and they hadn't heard back from home. And so you can feel the heaviness, the abandonment, the isolation that they must have felt at that time. And then there's this group of women that come in, get everything organized, and make certain that these soldiers on the front lines have mail from back home and vice versa. That had to be so uplifting.
Right.
To the Allied forces. And it was a remarkable story. So check out this movie. It's great.
And just what they had to go up against in being, again, women of color and also just women in the armed forces. And regardless of what came against them, the discrimination, the, patriarchy, all the abuse they suffered, they still continued on and got things done. So that was really inspiring. A great movie to check out. I've done some more reading on them, and it's so inspiring.
Yeah.
And then even Dr. Yarber mentioned the quote from Polly Murray.
Such a good quote.
During the interview, which I loved. I've put that in my notes too. It says, "One person plus one typewriter constitutes a movement."
Love it.
And it just made me think of, some current day heroes for us, which one, Dahlia Lithwick, who
Oh my gosh.
we interviewed a couple of years ago.
We need to have her back on the
We
pod.
do, about her book, Lady Justice. And she says, women plus law equals magic. And, she talks about such female heroes such as Sally Yates and Becca Heller, who fought the Muslim travel ban, Roberta Kaplan, who sued the neo-Nazis in Charlottesville, of course, Stacey Abrams, and many other women who were working behind the scenes during the first Trump administration to combat, unlawful and unfair practices. And so she just, is a hero to me for helping share those stories. Another interview we had, again, here we are, 250 episodes. I guess this is what's coming to mind. But even the story that we interviewed Ilian Wu about Ellen and William Crafts.
Yeah, great story.
Master slave husband wife, about Ellen, who she was a slave and she took on the role. She was able to pass as a white man, and she and her husband escaped.
It was a remarkable story.
It's just incredible stories of women throughout history, whether from biblical days to more current days, who are so inspiring and just need to be shared alongside the stories that maybe aren't ever going to be as known. The people in our family, the mothers in our family who work 2 to 3 jobs to piece it together and to make sure that, their children survived. It's just, like I said, I'll go back to, we need more than a month. The end.
All right. Well, let it be said, let it be done. We'll just extend this month into a year. So.
Yes.
But so many great women that have shaped history, Missy. And I'm so glad you brought up Dahlia Lithwick, because all of those stories that she wrote about and the female lawyers who were fighting all of the craziness during the first Trump administration, there are women who are doing that right now today. And I cannot think of anybody more significant than our dear friend, Skye Perryman at Democracy Forward.
100%.
Skye is fearless, and she is taking on these executive orders right and left, from ICE entering churches looking for migrants, to the department trying to close the doors to the Department of Education. Sky and her team of lawyers are remarkable in fighting what's going on today. And so big shout out to Sky and the entire Democracy Forward team. Really appreciate all they're doing on our behalf, and keep up the great work, because we couldn't be where we are without you.
Absolutely. It's like I've said before of Sky. I adore her as a friend. And I said before, she's the one on the playground that's dragging you, grabbing your hand, saying, let's go, we're going to do this. I mean, and she brings it to the table every single day. And I know there are many other women out there doing that. I just applaud them. I wish we had all of their stories to share. Yes, we need more than a month.
We do. Absolutely. So it's going to be a year. So happy Women's History Year, as it has been decreed here at
That's right.
Faith Weekly. Well, Misty, before I let you go, we've been doing this. Going to ask you to do it again. What is your joy for this week?
You're out of town.
Why does that always come up?
Sorry. I just couldn't ignore the obvious answer there. Yes. Yeah, no, really. I think my official entry for the log this week would just be the beautiful weather that we've had. I know that sounds kind of silly, but I walked to the post office today just to pick up some envelopes that we needed. I didn't have to walk, but I did. It was just the sunshine was so wonderful. And so, yeah, that brought me joy.
Well, good. Well, along those same lines,
What brings you hope?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because over the weekend, Missy, I mowed the grass for the first time in 2025.
So you're weather related as well.
Yeah. And so the grass is starting to green up, kind of gives you that life. And you talked about the warmth. That spring is right around the corner. In fact, it's here, but with all of the blooms, I could do without the pollen, by the way.
Absolutely.
But the grass is turning greener, warmer weather, just everything about it. Spring, hope's eternal, I guess is the saying. And so that's what gives me hope today.
Well, let me poo-poo on all of that, because we also just got an estimate from our landscaper of what it's going to cost to get the backyard in shape. So,
well, there is that. Well, happy 250th episode, Missy.
Yeah, happy 250th to you. I will look forward to my gift.
Okay, well, it's in the mail. Well, Missy and I will be back for episode 251 next week. And until then, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.